Welcome back to Vikes with a mic. As always, your host JC here with my co-host and good friend Tyler Williams. And today is an extremely special episode because we are so excited to welcome Jack Day. This is a gentleman who, if you are on Vikings Twitter, you should know very well. He has made a name for himself. He was the person who broke the Sheldon Richardson news of him returning back to Minnesota this offseason was tweeted and cited and sourced by guys like Tom Pelissero, Ian Rappaport, Pro Football Talk, Mike Florio. And funny enough, K-Fan, the group that he works for, the radio station, didn't even realize that he worked there. So Jack, for those of you who maybe don't know you that well, can you describe from your perspective how this all went down, this 20-minute radio segment where Chris Hockey was absolutely flabbergasted by the fact that you were a real person?
Yeah, well, I'll start out by just saying I appreciate you guys for having me on. Anytime I get the chance to kind of talk about Vikings, I have to say yes about it. So I'm sure if you follow me on Twitter, you will find that out too. It's all I really talk about. But yeah, that was back in June now, which seems like it was forever ago. But that was one of the more crazy weeks of my lifetime because I have a source that I've started to kind of build a relationship with that started a little bit more throughout the draft process, just kind of bouncing names off each other with like talking about some of the college guys going in the draft class. So that kind of built up from that point. And that day, I think it was Courtney Cronin broke the Danielle Hunter news that they had figured out like his contract. So when that was all going on, the individual I was chatting with was like, hey, Sheldon Richardson's in town. He's like about to land, or he said he's on a plane. And I was like, wait, what? And so he's like, yeah, and I asked like 7-8 times, like, can I break this? And I got the okay, kind of losing my thought process, going back in time, talking about this. He got his feet on the ground. He landed in Minneapolis. That's when I sent the tweet out. And it was kind of funny seeing that because it wasn't like just Chris Hockey by any means. At that point I think it was 300 or 400 followers on Twitter. So people are like, one of the first people to quote it that was bigger than me, her name's Mary Kay. She's a Cleveland.com reporter who Ellis Williams had on one of my former podcasts a couple weeks ago. He was formerly now working for Cleveland.com. He just transitioned out to Carolina, and he's a Carolina Panthers beat reporter. But she said something. So then I had Browns fans all over my Twitter saying, like, who is this guy? Like, this cannot be real. And so then that turned into that. Man. And then it started getting confirmed by these bigger names. Like when I saw, I think Field Yates was another one of the earlier ones. And then all of a sudden I saw, who was the Ian Rappaport was the biggest one. I saw Rappaport confirm it, and I was like, this is like actually happening right now. Like, this is crazy. And I've went to journalism school, like have wanted to break a story for however long. And it wasn't the biggest story either. So I like felt comfortable. Like if I were to for some reason be wrong on Sheldon Richardson, it like wouldn't have been the biggest deal. It wasn't like I was saying, oh, Patrick Mahomes is coming to Minnesota or something along those lines. But, and then like the day went on and I had some people start to text me. And they're like, oh, JG with Bumper to Bumper. JG is talking about you on K-Fan right now.
Oh, wow.
And talking. And then I was like, okay, so that they know. And then, yeah, I woke up the next morning I had about 6 missed phone calls. And my girlfriend was like, your phone has been ringing off the hook. Like, you better check and make sure there's not an emergency. Like, I'm working from home still. So I tend to utilize my sleep-in time to the best of my abilities. So it was like 6:30, 6:15 in the morning. And I finally answered one of my calls for my stepdad, and he's like, "Are you listening to K-Fan right now?" I was like, "No, you just woke me up. I'm just getting out of bed." And he's like, "They're trying to get a hold of you." So I had a couple missed calls from the K-Fan hotline too. Called them back, and that whole morning was hilarious because at that point I didn't know that the video had circulated. I didn't know that happened. And just going back and watching the video. And then I had the opportunity, I think like a couple weeks after that, I went in and sat with those guys, met Chris Hockey officially. I actually met him officially the night prior. They did their comedy stand-up bit out at Canterbury. And I went up and I work side by side with AJ Mansour. He runs the KFan.com. So he's kind of,
Gotcha.
he knows who I am. Meat Sauce, a lot of those guys knew who I was, but it was for some reason just didn't. And obviously we talked about this on the show too. And when I went in, I was only in the office pre-COVID for probably 4.5 months. So not everyone knew who I was. So it wasn't like unexpected by any means, but some of the guys that kind of started following along some of my draft stuff and they'd seen that, but Chris Hockey wasn't one of those people. And that whole video where obviously my whole setup is right here from work.
Right.
So my desk at iHeart is literally empty. It literally looks like it could have been staged.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
it was hilarious, but the whole thing was cool. It was fun getting to go in and sit with those guys. They were all awesome with it, but it was humbling experience too, just kind of being able to do something that I've wanted to do. I mean, I've followed Adam Schefter since I was a little kid for the most part. Like I've always wanted to be in that situation. So it was cool getting to that point. And I actually brought up Sheldon Richardson's name, which feels like the first time on Load the Box prior to this show, because he hasn't done a lot. Armin Watts has kind of stolen some of that thunder, but yeah, it was
Big
a cool experience, and kind of getting that recognition from not only local media, but national media was really cool.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Well, it's so great to hear it from your perspective too. For those listening, if you haven't already checked it out, just go ahead, hit Google and search who in the hell is Jack Day. Should be the first link that pops up from the power trip. And yeah, it's like a 20-minute ordeal. And I was sitting here laughing my butt off for the entire 20 minutes. Because not only was like that a super cool experience, especially with the few interactions on Twitter that we had before you broke the news, just as a fan of, your work. And I'm sure I'm speaking for Tyler too when I say this. But like knowing how cool of a guy you were too. And just because of the whole COVID situation, the fact that it was like, oh, wow, like this is a totally like real world example of somebody, having to deal with all of this stuff and it directly kind of impacting the workplace in a pretty significant way at the time, obviously. But awesome to hear that you guys are all hooked up together now and officially been introduced. For those listening, by the way, if you haven't already, also hit Twitter and follow Jack Day at Jack_H_Day. He does still do a ton of news for KFan. I think you also write for the Vikings Wire, right?
Yeah, yes. It's been a while since I've done that, but I've been so busy with iHeart, and obviously KFan is under the iHeart umbrella, so I've done a lot more work geared towards that. But my favorite thing, and I kind of made this is another thing now that it's like crazy that this happened for me. This was back like the draft time, and I say this as a grown up huge Vikings fan, but the draft time, I almost like the NFL draft and like the 2 months leading up to the draft more than I like the actual football season itself. I don't know. It's just weird. I love something about throwing on highlight films and just watching these college kids. And I'm not as big. I see you have the Tyler Johnson jersey. That is sweet hanging up behind you. I'm not like, I love pulling for the Gophers, but I've been so emotionally invested into the Vikings that it like takes a toll on me throughout the remaining sports that the state has.
Oh man.
But I just love watching like it's not even good necessarily, just entertaining college quarterbacks. And the biggest thing that prior to that Sheldon Richardson thing, which might be kind of cool, and you can tell if you watch the interview that I was nervous as hell during this interview, but I got the chance to interview Zach Wilson last year, and this was when he was like halfway through his season at BYU. So he wasn't quite at that point. It was like, hey, this kid might be a late first round pick, mid first round pick. Then all of a sudden he gets called, and obviously it was kind of expected for the Jets to take him second overall after he went on and kind of went on that run. But looking back at that, like that opened up gates, and I did a cool story on VikingsWire.com for that. That was up on YouTube. It was I kind of milked that and spread it out to as many media outlets as I could with that. But that was another thing where just like literally sent an email to someone within BYU's communications department. They're like, yeah, let's get it set up. And I was like, I was not expecting to get that answer back from you, but you know what? I took the 10, 15 minutes of screen time I had with Zach Wilson, and it makes it more fun watching him now. Hopefully, and obviously he hasn't gotten out to the best start of his career, but he just got banged up. But
yeah, he's
hurt. I'm excited to watch kind of how that progresses. I still had Justin Fields graded out higher than him, and Justin Fields hasn't looked great either yet. But that's kind of a good news for Vikings fans.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for those of you listening and wondering, I'll be honest, I have not watched that interview, but I'm definitely gonna watch it after this conversation. You can find that on YouTube at Jack Day. That is, I assume, your personal.
I think it's still pinned on my Twitter too.
It is also pinned on your Twitter page. Yes, it is. And then last but not least, you also do a podcast, which I understand you just got back from recording, which you actually record live. Correct me if I'm wrong. The Load the Box podcast, which is absolutely fantastic. Love listening to you guys. Definitely check that out. They're also on Twitter at LTB Vikings. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get into some questions for you, if that's all right.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Tyler, I know that you have a couple
Yep.
that you want to rattle off. Take it.
Yes. So, Jack, my first question, I just wanted to talk about like the corners so far this year. So Peterson's obviously hurt right now, and I don't think he'll be back till Green and the earliest is what I'm hearing. And I was just wondering your thoughts. Like, so we have Dantzler, Breland, and Mack obviously are 3 starters right now. Do you think this team needs to like go for a trade maybe at the deadline for more depth? Because I've been hearing rumors about Xavier Howard or any other names that you could think of. Do you think that it's a possibility for us to make a move like that at the deadline for a corner?
I definitely think it could be a possibility. I don't like the odds of that happening. Mike Zimmer and Spielman talked today, and they were essentially said something along the lines that they haven't even talked about that yet, which is kind of worrisome, sitting as like a Vikings follower, that your GM and your head coach aren't talking, at the very least talking about trades. But I do think what the Vikings need to do, and this is kind of me saying I don't know if I want them to make a trade, because Bashaud Breeland and Patrick Peterson are both on 1-year deals. No matter what happens this season, I think Vikings fans need to feel somewhat comfortable going into 2022, knowing what Cameron Dantzler brings to this team, because Cameron Dantzler showed so much promise in 2020. Like, he was really one of the points of that defense where it was like, this might have been a steal in the 3rd round. You have the unfortunate stuff happen with Jeff Gladney this offseason, no longer on the team. They trade away Mike Hughes. It's been fairly a disastrous stretch of drafting cornerbacks for a head coach that is a cornerback whisperer. But I really need to see what Cameron Dantzler can do, because he's entertaining not only in coverage. We've seen him have some sticky coverage. I know DJ Moore beat him in Carolina to kind of get Carolina down the field, and which was one of the most bizarre sequences I've seen watching this team. It was frustrating seeing a Mike Zimmer-led defense give up 98 yards in under 2 minutes, which was not easy to watch. But I love watching Cameron Dantzler, because not only can he has that coverage aspect. Another play that sticks in my head with him is the play in 2020 last year, where it was like 4th and 10, 4th and 15, whatever it was, and they were in Seattle, and he lets up that big play to DK Metcalf. Like, if you can escape the big plays that he gives up, I think he's primed to have a very long career in the NFL. And he's entertaining in the run game too. He'll stick you in run support. And I love corners that play physical. I know this offseason people were saying he'd put on 10 pounds. It doesn't look like that on film, but it's fun seeing a willing participant when you've seen a history of guys like Antoine Winfield play for this team. You got to have that, especially when you have like a grittier head coach in Mike Zimmer that wants to play a physical style. And then switching over to, I think we can kind of skip over Mackenzie Alexander, because I think he's actually played pretty well. I think he's locked in there at nickel. But Bashaud Breeland is another interesting guy to talk about. Obviously, he's had his tweets sent out that I'm sure you guys have talked about. But he's starting to come around and show some signs of being what I think fans thought he was going to be. And now he's needed. It's going to be Cameron Dantzler and Bashad Breeland. And until if a trade were to happen, this doesn't feel like the front office that's going to make. If they make a trade, I don't think it's going to be for a guy like Howard. I think it's going to be for a smaller name guy. That just seems like what this front office tends to do, unless they want to go big like they did with Unique Ngakoue, but they kind of shot themselves in the foot with that trade too. So
right.
I think what with Bashad Breeland, though, he started, and this is kind of goes back to me having some conversation with a couple of my sources. He was playing hurt through the first couple of weeks of the season. He was banged up, and I know that's not necessarily the biggest excuse. He was playing a little bit banged up, and I know it's frustrating still when you're seeing a guy like that just get burnt time in and time. But over the last, I think it's the last 3 or 4 games, his PFF has drastically changed. He's been a lot better in run support. He had that.
It was really good this past week.
Yeah, he had a big play in Carolina to start the game out with that interception. And like I said, watching guys that are willing participants. I don't know if you guys saw the video of Mike Hughes going after Derrick Henry this week. He just stopped.
Yes.
He didn't even go for the hit. So I need those guys to play physical. I think Mackenzie Alexander plays with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And you have Harrison Smith and Xavier Woods, who are both extremely physical safeties, obviously. So I think, I don't know. I think I'm fine with rolling with the secondary they have right now, but it's a little bit concerning because if one of those guys gets hurt, then it's like Chris Boyd, or you bring someone up from the practice squad. Harrison Hand is a smaller guy that's probably looked at as more of a slot corner. So it would, I don't think it would be a bad thing to bring someone in for depth, but I think I'm okay with rolling with those 3.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't even, you didn't even touch on the cap issues, right? With bringing in a guy like Howard, close to $13 million when I think right now, after the recent trade of Stephen Weatherly, which I want to get into here with your thoughts on the defensive line, since, you're such a big defensive line guy. You kind of got to get into those ramifications with this front office, because that's definitely, I feel like, what Rick Spielman is constantly thinking about. Cap space with a guy like Rob Brzezinski in the office and kind of in his ear. But yeah, I think you bring up also some great points about Cam Dantzler. He's nicknamed the Needle for a reason, right? But the Bashad Breeland stuff. Now, still breaking news. I had no idea that he really was injured, because Tyler, I know you and I made some comments the first couple of weeks that he was doing that Xavier Rhodes thing, where it's like, he got burnt and he's injured. Drink,
grab his ankle.
Yeah, right. But that, it brings a whole new light to it. That's for sure. To know that he was actually kind of dealing with something, and it makes a lot of sense, because when they originally signed him from Kansas City, I was really excited about it, and I thought he was very much so underplaying what I thought he was going to bring to Minnesota right off the bat. So to backtrack a little bit, I want to know your thoughts about the defensive line, because recently we traded away Stephen Weatherly. Granted, I think he was playing 25% of snaps or something like that, which for a guy, that's been in the league as many years as him and started last year in Carolina, he does deserve to kind of have that opportunity somewhere else if he's not going to get it here. And I don't want to get too much into my thoughts on the other guys, because I want to hear what you have to say. But what are also your thoughts on, bringing up a guy like Kenny Willekes from a practice squad, or rolling with one of the, recent draft picks that we have? And then I know that you also mentioned Armin Watts. So just give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of buzz around Kenny Willekes. I know he was a 7th-round pick, which Rick Spielman loves. That was also involved in the Stephen Weatherly trade. But
yes,
I think there's got to be a little bit of mutual respect between that front office and what Stephen Weatherly has meant to this organization. Obviously, this was his second stint here. And the Vikings, looking at that $45 million cap, and I'll say this on the front end, I've been a Kirk Cousins supporter since he arrived in Minnesota. But that $45 million cap hit next year, it's scary. And I think any little bit amount of any extra money that you can find, getting that $1.5 million back for a guy that isn't playing this year and probably isn't going to play this year, with how Everson Griffin has, I tweeted this out a couple weeks ago, maybe it was during the Carolina game. It was like, something along the lines of, just like we all expected, Everson Griffin has been the best free agency signing for the Minnesota Vikings in 2021.
Right.
It's like a 33 or 34-year-old pass rusher that everyone else thought was washed up. When he had that first sack of the season on that nasty spin move, it was just like, it just felt right, because Vikings fans have watched that for the last 10 plus years, whatever it was he was here. So getting him back and playing at a high level, I mean, the Vikings, I think I saw a stat today. I think they're tied for first with Chicago with 21 or 22 total sacks on the season. That's coming after
22, I think.
After a season in 2020 where Yannick Ngakoue played 5 or 6 games and still led the team in sacks after he left. That's crazy. So I think it speaks volumes of how good Danielle Hunter is too, because Danielle Hunter leads that group, I think, with 6 sacks. And then we still haven't even really gotten to see this front four actually click, on like all cylinders, because Michael Pierce has been banged up. And Rick Spielman said last week during his kind of bye presser that he was expecting Michael Pierce to be back. He didn't practice today, which I think is kind of worrisome, especially going up against an offense that has Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard doing damage at such a high level, obviously. But
not offensive line.
Yes, but Delvin Tomlinson and Armon Watts have both been kind of, I think Delvin Tomlinson, I'm not going to say he's been a pleasant surprise, because I kind of thought going into the season that he's a good piece to have on your front, because even though I thought he was going to play more of that nose tackle position, but they kind of brought Armon Watts in to do that instead, and they've kept him in the 3-tech spot. So I'm a big Delvin Tomlinson fan. I love watching the big, what Eric Kendricks called them, the meaty boys or whatever he called them during the offseason. Michael Pierce and Delvin Tomlinson, getting Michael Pierce back is going to be huge against Dallas. I hope that's the case, but if he doesn't practice the next couple of days, that might be worrisome. And then having a guy like Sheldon Richardson, who doesn't need to necessarily play on early downs, you can throw him out there on pass rushing situations. I think that's huge. You can kind of mix these guys around too, because Sheldon Richardson can play outside. You can bump wherever the weak link is. You saw Mike Zimmer willing to do that against the Saints in that playoff game in 2019. You can bump Danielle and Everson Griffin down to the inside. You can kick other guys outside. But I think the biggest question mark for me, which I thought has been kind of odd, I actually thought that Janarius Robinson, he was the guy that I was most excited for that they drafted along the defensive line, not Patrick Jones. He gets put on IR, probably towards the end of training camp, and hasn't even seen the practice field because he's been hurt. Patrick Jones is one where, with Weatherly kind of starting to phase out, maybe we see him start to at least make that 53-man roster. I think a lot of people were expecting him to already at this point, and he hasn't done it. So I don't know. I know Andre Patterson talked about that today as well. He's like, he told him, and he said this in his press conference. He had this conversation with him and said Everson Griffin wasn't starting for the first 4 or 5 years of his career. So I think that it's just so Minnesota Vikings-esque for them to keep these guys just kind of waiting, and Mike Zimmer-esque as well. They don't like forcing these guys out onto the field. I mean, you see it with –
it's a perfect way to put it.
For some reason, Justin Jefferson didn't start until week 3 last year, and he's an absolute stud. Like, that's frustrating. Stephon Diggs is another one who exploded onto the scene, and he didn't even get to play. Obviously, he was a 5th-round wide receiver, so it's a little bit different. But
he fell for other reasons, right? Injury reasons.
There's some weird stuff, and I think he's obviously exceeded expectations, anyways. Injuries or not injuries, but I think the defensive line has been a big reason why the Vikings are still 3-3. I know this team very well could be 1-5. They could also very well be 5-1. It's just the Minnesota Vikings way to do things, and they have a brutal stretch of games coming up here. And it's gonna be a fun stretch for Vikings fans to monitor.
Yes, absolutely.
Fun is a nice way to put it. Fun is a nice way to put it.
Yeah, right.
But no, my next question was, this is kind of relating to maybe like the off season, but Mike Zimmer's future. If this team somehow misses the playoffs, I know it's an odd year and we usually make the playoffs. So if we somehow miss the playoffs this year, do you think Zimmer will be gone? And do you think he'll be gone? And do you have any other replacement? Like, cause I got like 2 guys, but like, I'm not like sold on like these people at all, to be honest with you. I'm not like exactly sure.
Yeah. I'm there with you on the torn between guys. I don't know. It doesn't feel like there's a guy like where you see the Sean McVays come onto the scene and take over. Like, I know Kellen Moore is a guy that we talked about on Load the Box last week for Dallas, but I mean, he was handed an offense with Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb now. Like it'd be kind of hard to fail. And I say that as Quinn Kubiak comes in and kind of is an emotional roller coaster for Vikings fans with his play calling, with arguably one of the most high-powered, what could be one of the most high-powered offenses in all of football, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But I don't even know if making the playoffs saves Mike Zimmer's job. And this is just me speculating. I don't really have any reasoning behind this. I haven't investigated too much into this, but I don't know. I don't see Mike Zimmer coaching this football team next year even if they have a quick exit from the playoffs. If they make it as a 7 seed, go 9 and whatever it would be. Is it 9 and 8 now? I always mix that up now with the extra game. But if they go 9 and 8 and squeak in as a 7 seed and get blown out in the wild card game, like I don't see that. I think they need to make some sort of legitimate run. I think he was able to do exactly what he wanted to do in rebuilding this defense up over the offseason. The offense has shown that in strides that they can compete with. I mean, the 2 losses now, the Cleveland game was a snooze fest. That was tough to watch. I was at that game in the press box. Brutal game to watch.
Yeah.
But the other 2 games now, you lose to Cincinnati and you lose to Arizona, who are both, by the way, the number 1 seeds in their respective conferences right now. And the Vikings should have beaten both of them, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So I mean, the Vikings are a good football team and they have no reason to be missing out on the playoffs. So I think if they do miss the playoffs, the good news for Vikings fans, I don't know who the guy is going to be that comes in, but you have to think it's going to be someone with an offensive minded, and they're going to take over an offense that could potentially be, like I said, one of the most high-powered offenses in the entire league, with Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen still somehow playing at such a high level, Delvin Cook, you get Irv Smith Jr. back next year. Like, this is a good offense. And the offensive line, Brian O'Neill is the not the youngest. He's the oldest guy on the offensive line, and he's only 26 years old. So the pieces are there for this offense to be good. The defense worries me going into next season because all these guys on 1-year contracts. But there are pieces. I really think this is sexy is the word I want to use. I think this is a sexy team to take over. You have a pretty new stadium in US Bank Stadium, a brand new practice facility, and a ton of talent across the board. So I would think it would be towards the top of that list if you're starting to interview for head coaching jobs. And I think that might be the case if if Mike Zimmer doesn't lead the Vikings, I want to say deep into the playoffs, but he's got to have a couple wins in the playoffs if he wants to keep his job.
Yeah, I think it's hard to disagree with you there.
And I'll say this too. I've been a huge Zimmer guy too.
Yeah.
Since he's been here. I mean, he's put winning football in front of us. It's just never been quite good enough. He gets us to the NFC Championship game in 2017, and then his defense completely falls out from underneath him. And it's like, where did the defense go that got this team here? Because it was fun watching Case Keenum do what he did, but Case Keenum was never the answer at quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yes.
That was a special season that kind of just went out the door. I think the Vikings could have won that Super Bowl. They do it in the most Vikings fashion possibly, with getting out in front of Philly, and then they don't score again, and the defense just completely implodes. So that was not to rub salt in the wound of Vikings fans, but yeah, it's been just a weird stretch where it's continued mediocrity is how I like to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I find the rubbing salt in the wound for Vikings fans joke even funnier, because as far as Zimmer goes, it feels like, there hasn't been a year where, something drastic hasn't happened. And I by no means want to give him an out, because I agree to a certain extent that there have been too many times where a defensive minded coach, has gotten his butt handed to him on defense. But yeah, I mean, obviously missed kicks for us and against us. Adrian Peterson situation, there's so many different things.
There's always something. His eye situation.
Everything.
Yes, the eye. Oh my gosh.
Year, fumbled. It's like he's gone through a brutal stretch. And that's bringing all of that up. That's without even talking about the last 2 years with COVID that he's had to go through. And obviously the entire NFL has to go through that, but his 6-7 years here have been a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah, absolutely insane. I can tell you right now, though, if he makes a deep run, if these Vikings figure it out and come out this bye and they keep playing winning football, these Mike Zimmer storylines, this hot seat is gonna go on ice real quick. And I could easily see how Zim could go from a guy that's, about to be fired into coach of the year candidate, with a run of like 8 or 9 wins in these next 11 or 12 games. So I got one last question for you here, and it kind of is about something you've already touched on, but I know that it's something that I think you dug into today on your podcast. And I know it's something that we wanted to really dig into deeper, so I'm glad that we're able to do it with you. In your professional opinion, is Kirk Cousins an MVP candidate?
I think he can be. I don't think it's necessarily fair to put him up there with like the Kyler Murrays of the world right now, guys that are absolutely just balling out. Like, I mean, all of a sudden Joe Burrow might find his way into that conversation.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many like young, talented quarterbacks, and I think that really takes away from this 34-year-old, 33, whatever Kirk Cousins is. I don't even know how old he is. He might be 33, 34. It takes away from him because he's not with these younger. He's not as fancy as a Joe Burrow. He doesn't move around like Lamar or Kyler Murray. He doesn't have a rocket launcher for an arm like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. But at the end of the day, Kirk Cousins is a damn good quarterback, And I think I wouldn't be shocked that one day he just goes off for a year, and he did win one. I think it's possible. He's playing good enough right now. And on top of putting up the numbers, like everyone on the opposite side of me, there's people on the opposite side of the spectrum, obviously, that aren't for Kirk Cousins. Sure. He's doing what they've said he can't do over the last 3 years of him being here, and he's putting up stats. The garbage time stuff, that's just a fiction of imagination. I'm sure you guys are both aware of Dustin Baker on Twitter and how he kind of is an advocate for Kirk Cousins. I shouldn't even say advocate. He just puts out stats, and people try to argue him with those stats. But I don't know if
shout out to CBS Sports, by the way, who steals all of his stuff same day.
That's funny. But yeah, I think he's good enough to one day potentially win that. I think he's good enough to win a Super Bowl in this league. Yeah. We're seeing something now that I think a lot of people that have been for having Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, we're seeing he's starting to have more success when he's getting hit less. Imagine that. The pocket passer is having success when he's got
a clean pocket.
And he's not. It's not like the Vikings offensive line has been fantastic by any means. I know I said a tweet on my other podcast. They are on pace right now. They've had one of the best. I think I might have it up here still. I can read this because this blew my mind. The Vikings offensive line has produced its lowest sack percentage, 3.6% of all time throughout the first 6 games of the season, a stat dating back to 1970. The line has only given up 9 sacks through 6 games, which is tied for the lowest in team history. And I think some of that comes down to Kirk Cousins being better and getting the ball out of his hands a little bit quicker. Clint Kubiak game scripting around that, knowing you have Christian Darrisaw. I mean, people were raving about his performance, and his performance was good, but there were some plays where I think Kirk would have had some issues, but he got rid of the ball so fast. So long story short, yes, I think Kirk Cousins could be an MVP. I don't think it's necessarily fair to put him up in that category quite yet for this season, but I've definitely written articles about it. I've mentioned it in several articles where if he keeps up putting up huge stats, another guy that I didn't bring up, Tom Brady, I don't know how the heck he's doing what he's still doing at his age, but he's he's a different breed. And everyone knows that obviously by now, but it's hard to take away from a 44-year-old that's doing stuff that these 25, 26-year-olds can't even do. But I think Kirk Cousins is good enough at potentially at least getting his name in that conversation. I don't know if it'll ever, like I said, the national media kind of downplays any success that he gets. So it might be hard when for some reason the rest of the United States and the NFL fan base, they listen to that and they say, hey, Kirk Cousins can't win on primetime. It's like, you guys, if you're just a blindfolded statement, they're telling you information and you're kind of spitting it out of your mouth without even digging into it. But I think Kirk Cousins, what he's done this year is extremely impressive, even albeit against Detroit and against Carolina. He should have 4 game-winning drives and his stat lines have been pretty darn impressive too. So I think he's good enough. I don't know if I'm going to stand up here and pound my fist and say, hey, he's going to be an MVP, because I think there's quarterbacks that are playing at a much higher level than him right now. But I think he's good enough to one day at least have his name in the conversation.
I just need to know how many of those 9 sacks were in that Cleveland game.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know.
right?
And how many of those sacks are on Rashad Hill getting absolutely blown up and getting smoked, or I don't know. The offensive line isn't perfect by any means, but the fact that we can sit up here and talk about them being even average, I think is a win for Vikings fans.
I just think you give Kirk an average offensive line in a clean pocket on most of those, he's going to make the play the majority of the time because he's that good. Like you said, he's just underrated. People are not giving him his props.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just saw a tweet today from PFF. It was like, is Kirk Cousins now the most underrated quarterback or something like that? And basically anybody who was a Vikings fan is like, he's always been underrated. You guys just think that he's bad, but like, you're just, like you said, kind of spewing these national narratives that are actually not based in fact whatsoever. But I love that in your answer, you don't even bring up, his supporting cast, even though for guys that are currently at probably the front running position for MVP, like a guy like Kyler Murray or a guy like Joe Burrow. Granted, Joe Burrow, his offensive line is atrocious, but those guys have amazing supporting casts. And I'm not saying that the Vikings don't, but you're missing your number one starting tight end. KJ Osborne has definitely stepped up for, on and off games, I would say, compared to what we've gotten in the past out of Thielen. So the fact that he's making things happen with these type of players, again, not to take anything away from them, I would put that notch definitely in there for why he deserves to potentially be at least in the dark horse conversation for MVP. But we appreciate you answering a couple questions. Now we're going to go ahead, and if it's all right with you, get into the matchup that is coming up. Finally, no longer do we have to not watch Vikings football on Sunday. The bye week, it always feels like, just the most grueling time of the year, at least for us Vikings fans, I think, the diehard guys. So let's just get right into it. What are your thoughts going into Dallas? I think I saw a pretty freaking awesome tweet from Load the Box about your thoughts on Kirk Cousins' night.
My co-host loved that and tweeted it out instantly after I said that. But it's interesting looking at both of these teams. They just seem so similar to me because you have, I think Dak Prescott's always going to be ahead of Kirk Cousins just because he is the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys in those MVP conversations. But they're both, in my mind, criminally underrated quarterbacks, both of them. But they both have superstar wide receivers that help that. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Dalton Schultz is coming onto the scene for Dallas. Both teams have a top 5, top 6. I don't really know where I'd put Zeke right now, but they both have, I'd say, elite running backs too. So these offenses are built very similarly. Dallas's advantage, offensive line, obviously. I think I'm taking Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen just slightly over Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. I love CeeDee Lamb. Loved him coming out of Oklahoma. I think he is going to be a stud in this league for a long time, but I think Justin Jefferson is also going to be a stud in this league for a long time. But and then just switching over to the defensive side of the ball, just talking similarities. There's an old Vikings safety playing for the Cowboys. There's an old Cowboys safety playing for the Vikings and Xavier Woods. Jaron Kearse is starting to get some playing time with Dallas. I think this would be more of a revenge game for him back at US Bank Stadium, just because I think there is more of a bitter taste in his mouth towards this franchise than Xavier Woods has towards the Dallas franchise.
Probably,
And I think the key matchup, we talked about this on Load the Box tonight too, but it's how well can the Vikings front seven answer against that rush attack with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard and just limit those huge chunky plays that we know those wide receivers can give Dallas. Because if you can stop Zeke and kind of start to get some pressure on Dak Prescott early on, I think that's huge for this game because they are used. I think Dak Prescott's used to playing in a fairly clean pocket. If you can kind of negate that rushing attack that they have early and often and let Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin pin their ears back and just go right after Dak Prescott, I think that's huge. At US Bank Stadium, like I said, that Cleveland Browns game, the Detroit game, back-to-back games. I saw it at the Cleveland game. I saw a tweet about it at the Detroit game. Fans were throwing paper airplanes off the upper deck. Like it just was not entertaining football to watch. And it was, I mean, one of the weirder games where I up in the press box and I like legit was starting to get like hazy eyed and I felt like I could fall asleep. Like it was just bizarre. And I thought it was going to be such an entertaining game. You see Cleveland go out and have like a huge shootout against the Chargers the following week, which is crazy. Right. But I need to see something out of this Vikings offense because we saw what they can do. I mean, they're coming off a huge game against Carolina, but even there, it didn't feel like a huge game. There wasn't like enough excitement for me until that KJ Osborne play. And this is something that if you're a listener, Load the Box, you're probably sick and tired of me. I talk about this till I'm blue in the face. This team struggles so badly at playing complementary football. It hurts. And that's been the case since Kirk Cousins arrived in Minnesota. Like it's always been, well, Kirk Cousins can't elevate this team to the next level because of his contract. It's like, no, this defense, Mike Zimmer had all the money, not all the money he wanted, but he went out and got quite a few star acquisitions, in my opinion, people that should be difference makers on this team. This defense should be good, and it has been good. It was great last week up until the last 5 minutes of that football game. It's like, it's frustrating. You see that. And then you see the Arizona game where Kirk Cousins puts up 31 points. The offense puts up 31 points and the defense gives up 34. They can never have a game, it seems like. And we talked about this tonight too. Jordan brought it up, my co-host at Load the Box. I was at the Rams game a couple years ago and they lost 38-31 in a shootout in Los Angeles. It's been the case since then. Like the defense is on one week, then the offense is on. It's every other week. They kind of flip-flop, put both sides of the ball together. I have made this a pack over the last couple of weeks. I'm done talking about special teams on podcasts. I don't talk about the Vikings special teams anymore. But play good offense and play good defense, and good things will happen in the state. And there will be some more entertaining football that happens. I think we've seen both sides play well throughout the year. We're just yet to see that happen at the same time. And that's going to be a key when you go into the stretch against teams that are all 4 or 5 win teams.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I think going into this game, the biggest thing is going to be the fans for me. Dallas travels really well. I already know people close to me that, because it's Halloween night, they're kind of, and maybe not decided yet, but it seems like a lot of people are finding excuses to maybe not show up. And those who do show up, I think are going to be absolutely insane. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, this defense, I'm not worried about this offense coming off of that Carolina game. I really feel like this offense is going to continue that momentum. There's just, maybe it's something about that face that KJ made at the end of the game or something, but just the energy around that side of the ball is absolutely insane to me right now. And Dalvin today said that bye week came at a perfect time for him. He looks to be completely healthy. He wasn't even on the injury report today. Really nobody of major note aside from who we already talked about, Michael Pierce, is on the injury report. So it all comes down to like you said, basically the defense. But even more so, I guess, to get minute, is probably going to be the corners more so than the defensive line. With the first game without Pat Pete, prime time, in the lights, going up against two, like you said, absolutely fantastic receivers, a really great quarterback, and a guy who is coming off of a calf injury with Dak Prescott. Now I know that he's probably going to play, but hopefully that means he won't be as mobile. But he is going to be looking to take those deep shots. So our guys are going to have to, be really sticky in their coverage. And I am a tad bit worried about maybe not getting as many coverage sacks or as much coverage pressure without Pat Pete. Maybe a couple drives for those two guys to kind of get used to the feel of everything.
I mean, I'd have to agree with both you guys. I think the defense is probably the biggest concern coming into this game. I feel like, especially Dallas's running game, you have Ezekiel Elliott playing a lot better this year than he did last year. And also Tony Pollard is a change of pace type of running back. They bring him in a lot now, and it's just to give Zeke extra rest. But Pollard's coming in running really hard. Our defense hasn't been great stopping the run, specifically against Chris Carson and Joe Mixon early in the season. So I hope we can just close those holes in our defensive line. Our interior makes plays, and they don't give up anything really, because if I think you put pressure on Dak Prescott, I mean, he's going to be in trouble because of his injury. And, I mean, I like our defense. I like our odds if we put pressure on him for sure. And our corners can make plays with that.
Absolutely.
I do think this seems like a game, too, where there's such a narrative, and this is a narrative-driven team. Obviously, the narratives around Kirk Cousins, prime time, Mike Zimmer coming out of the bye. It's another huge narrative, and he hasn't been good. But a lot of his games, I saw a stat, I think like 5 of his 7 or 5 of his 8, however many games it was, they've been away games out of the bye too. And going on the road after a stretch where all the guys are out in California, or they're out. I mean, they get a week off too. Like the players do too. They kind of refresh. And I think this team is coming in differently, in my opinion. We're seeing Kirk Cousins, like when he was shaking the hell out of Mike Zimmer. I personally love that. Like I love that fire, because we haven't seen that. Like we need to see. And it was same thing in Carolina. Like he's playing good football right now, and he's doing it with that chip on his shoulder. He's kind of saying like, look at me, like I'm doing this. You guys are saying that I can't do this. So I have big expectations for Kirk Cousins in this game. And I have big expectations for Mike Zimmer. I think he knows he knows how important this stretch of games is for not only this franchise, but like he's coaching for his job. He knows that. The Wilfs have made that pretty clear. So I think he's going to come in with a good game plan. I think we're going to see, I have a feeling that Anthony Barr is going to be running around the field again. We didn't really see it. There's people kind of bashing him after he made that return, but that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, the guy hadn't played football in like 17 months or whatever it was. It had been a long time since he'd played football. And I think we're going to start to see why Mike Zimmer trusts Anthony Barr as much as he does. There was so many reports throughout training camp that, hey, we're starting to do some 3-4 looks. Get Anthony Barr involved in those 3-4 looks. I think not necessarily always 3-4 looks. I love the double A gap blitz that Mike Zimmer has kind of made himself off of. And let me tell you, that looks so much better with Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks and Nick Vigil. I think Nick Vigil filled in admirably for Anthony Barr, but getting Barr back in that role is so huge. He's so much better in run support. I think we're going to start to see things start to click and pick up for him. And he is a huge, huge missing piece. He's been a huge missing piece for that defense. So I think the turnaround of this defense is going to start to happen a little bit because of him, specifically within that front 7. And then the last kind of thing, flipping to the other side of the ball, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you're overly familiar and you're seeing how it's a Dallas Cowboys thing. Like if you're doing good, you're going to get hyped up by the national media. That's just the case.
Exactly.
But Trayvon Diggs, obviously, I'm sure you guys are fully aware that he has 7 interceptions in his first 6 games. It's all over the place. And I think, I mean, it's fun watching ball hawk cornerbacks like that. Like I don't think there's a lot of people saying on Twitter that are mainly Dallas Cowboys fans saying, oh, it's Kirk Cousins in prime time. Trayvon Diggs is going to get 3 interceptions. Just wait and see. That's not going to happen. I think Justin Jefferson might torch him a couple times and expose him. I said this on Load the Box as well. Start doing some of those double moves, hitch and goes, get Justin Jefferson out in space and utilize him. He is a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL right now. He's not going to be. He is a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. Utilize him and let Kirk Cousins just decipher this defense, because I think he's more than capable of doing so.
Absolutely. Either you are listening to our show, or we're constantly, or maybe our brainwaves are just connected. Because Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, but the man just talked about things that we have probably preached since you and I have started talking about.
Specifically the Kirk Cousins intensity kind of thing. We talked a lot about that last season, because it seemed like last season he was not into it at all compared to so far this year. We feel like it's shown on his play on the field for sure.
Yeah, and that's absolutely something it stems back. I was out at training camp once only this year, which was nice being back out there. but he had a couple like 40-yard plus touchdowns. One was the Adam Thielen. I think it wasn't KJ. I think it was Irv Smith Jr., which isn't always fun talking about when he's not playing this year. I think everyone is expecting him to kind of be another huge piece of that offense. But just sitting there and listening to him after making a 40-yard touchdown in practice when they don't even have pads on, the guy was going berserk. And I was like, I wrote an article about it after I was out at training camp. And I was like, this looks and feels like a different Kirk Cousins. And that's shown now with the grabbing Mike Zimmer, with him getting pumped up. The emotions, yes, it was Detroit and Carolina. You should beat those teams. I think it's always safe to say that divisional games are going to be a little bit tighter than normal games. That's just how things go. And the Vikings were by far the better team in Carolina. They just let them hang on, which is frustrating. This Mike Zimmer-led team, they never put the dagger into their opponents. I think they need to do that against Dallas. But coming off those 2 wins, I think this team is feeling pretty good, albeit the fan base might not feel as good as these players, but a win is a win in the NFL, and they're on a 2-game winning streak now. And I think that's going to kind of carry over. And I think I predicted a win on my show earlier. I do think the Vikings are going to come out on top. I think they're going to carry over that momentum. Even if it's just a small amount of momentum, I still think that's going to carry over.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet again, you're absolutely reading our minds. As we are kind of getting close to wrapping this thing up, I think we should do this as we always do. And normally what we do is we give a little bit of a score prediction, just explain our thoughts, 1 or 2 sentences real quick. So we'll go ahead and go down the line, Tyler, myself, and then you, Jack, and feel free once you're done to rattle off whatever you have going on, promote yourself. Please let the people know. We might not have a massive following, but they definitely deserve to be listening and reading your stuff. So Tyler, what do you got, man? Start us off.
Oh my God. All right. So I think it's going to be a really close game down to the wire. I think Dalvin Cook runs for over 120 yards. He has a solid game. He's healthy again. I think he's going to just finally show out like he did last week. I think, though, the Vikings are going to lose. I think it's going to be really close. I'm going to go 30-28. I think we lose off a missed field goal. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry. It's going to sting a little bit, but yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that hurts.
Yeah.
I
just have bad vibes against Dallas, man.
No,
I don't know what it is. It's just weird.
That's fair. That's so fair. I'm much more optimistic. I don't think it comes down to the wire. However, I will say I think that there is a big moment in the third quarter that harkens back practically, moment for moment to the last time we faced up against Dallas, where EK had that swat on 4th down to kind of seal the game for us. I think that there is going to be a massive 4th down play that Eric Kendricks makes yet again in the third quarter that kind of seals the deal early for the Vikings. I think we win this one 35-23.
Wow. You're going big. Yeah, I have the Vikings coming out on top. I'll just stick with the same score prediction. I do think it's going to be a little bit closer, a little bit of a shootout fashion, but I think the key to this game comes down to if the Vikings win this game, Mike Zimmer plays Mike Zimmer style of football. I agree. Dalvin Cook needs to have a big game. They need to be able to control the clock. And when the defense is out there, they have to continue. For some reason, they're still a very, very good 3rd down defense. They're good in other areas, but they struggle early on in the run game. And they struggle late in games when they need to be putting their opponents away, which is just frustrating. You can't have that happen. And I agree with what you were saying earlier, JC, as well, with Cameron Dancer and Breland have to have a good game because these wide receivers, they can torch those cornerbacks if they don't show up. But if they show up, I think they can start to kind of turn some heads. I think they both have some really good football in front of them. It just depends on how they show up and if you can get pressure to Dak Prescott. That remains to be seen. But I have the Vikings coming out on top. I think my superstar of the game, I think that just all the signs point in the right direction of Justin Jefferson having a huge game. It's prime time, under the lights, Halloween. What better than giving all the kids in attendance a treat of gritting in the end zone a couple times? I think that'd be perfect. I think Justin Jefferson has a huge day. And I will say this, without without Kirk Cousins, I don't know if obviously Justin Jefferson's still an elite wide receiver, but someone's got to throw him the ball on Sunday night. And I think Kirk Cousins is going to be firing on all cylinders. I think he's out on a mission this year, kind of like how we just talked about. He's playing at a different level, and he knows all the narratives. I know he's kind of downplayed it in years past, but he knows what people say about him. It's all over the place. It'd be impossible to not see that stuff about yourself. So I think Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson go off. I think they have a huge game, and I think the Vikings come out on top 33-31.
Wow. Love it.
It's going to come down to the wire. It's every Vikings game. Every game's close.
Well, I hope that you both are wrong, but I hope that Jack is at least right in his outcome. Jack, we want to thank you again so much for coming. Let the people know, what do you got going on? Come on, promote yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys for having me. We actually pushed our State of Purple podcast back on. That'll be up on all KFAN social handles. We pushed that back to Friday this week. Normally we do a show every Tuesday, Thursday, and usually we do post-game type shows. I don't know if we'll do that this week with the game probably wrapping up at like 10:30, whenever that's going to be. But there will be a pregame show around, I think, 1:00 on Friday afternoon. KFAN.com is where I do the majority of my writing. I haven't written for Vikings Wire in quite some time. Make sure you're looking at Load the Box. You're going to go back, and if you watch that tonight too, it's going to be a lot of the similar things that I just said to you guys, but make sure to check that out as well. And that kind of wraps it up. But I just wanted to say I appreciate you two both for having me on. I had a fun time. Can't turn down fun Vikings talk. It's always a good time chatting, and hopefully we can be full of smiles on Sunday night.
Yes, absolutely. Full trick-or-treating baskets, and hopefully walking away with a W as well, and some Sunday scaries for the Dallas Cowboys. So with that is the end of this episode of Vikes with a Mic. Again, we want to thank Jack Day for coming on. Absolute stud, was super cool in accepting the request, answering all of our questions, and we wish you nothing but the best, man, moving forward. Would love to have you on at some point again. If you haven't already, make sure that you support the podcast in any way, shape, or form. Go ahead, share it with your friends. We also have a website, www.vikeswithamic.com, where all of our episodes are archived. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, comment on YouTube. We love when you guys reach out to us and we get to interact. With that, we will be back next week with our normal Tuesday episode starting up again. Hopefully going over a big W for the Minnesota Vikings. So thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, Skol.